My name's Christian Thompson. Here we are in Studio 30, Medici TV, and I have to say we have a very special guest with us today, Evgeny Kissin. You've been coming to Verbier many years, almost right from the beginning.
Yes. Not almost right from the beginning, from the very first year, since 1994. And I have missed, I think, only 3 festivals since then.
What brings you back every year?
I love it here.
And you come here with your family and you spend
Yes,
the whole
always.
festival and you have a...
Not the whole festival, but 10 days to a couple of weeks, usually.
And what are your favorite memories of playing here? Of the different combinations that you've played with, the different pieces, the different...
I have many wonderful memories, musical memories. Verbier was the only place where I collaborated with the legendary Kurt Sanderling. That was in the second year of the festival in 1995. We played Beethoven's 5th concerto, The Emperor, together.
Was that the same year that you played with Isaac Stern here?
Was it? Yes, exactly. And you are right to remember that was the only time I collaborated with Isaac Stern as well.
And you played a trio with Natalia Gutman, I think.
Exactly, 3 trios. Beethoven's Geister trio, Brahms's 3rd, and Mendelssohn's 1st.
What did you think of Isaac Stern? Because at that time he was a true legend and you were kind of an up-and-coming pianist, if we can imagine you ever being an up-and-coming pianist.
Yes, I met him for the first time 5 years before that, right after my debut at Carnegie Hall.
You played the 2 Chopin concertos, didn't you?
That was not at Carnegie Hall. That was at what was then Every Fisher Hall, because I played them with the New York Philharmonic, and they were not performing at Carnegie Hall. But then, a week or 2 later, I played my first solo recital at Carnegie Hall. And on the day after that, Mstislav Rostropovich gave a solo recital there, after which I was invited to dinner with him and his wife, with Isaac Stern and his wife. There were some other people present, and Isaac Stern even made a toast to me then.
Wow.
So I had known him personally before our collaboration in Verbier. Yes, he was a living legend, and it was he who was leading our ensemble, our group, during the rehearsals.
And do you think his was a style of violin playing that we've lost a little? Do you think violin playing has changed in general from this kind of...
I'm not a violinist, so I'm not the right person to judge those things.
When we talk about all the time in Verbier, how much has Martin been an inspiration or a mentor or someone that you've trusted over all these years?
I have never perceived Martin as a mentor, but he is the person who created the festival and who continues to
but you trust
organize everything that's going on here.
But you trust him. I mean, sometimes he asks you to do
In which
things.
way do you mean?
I mean, in terms of, for example, you came out and you played one Rachmaninoff prelude last week, which must have been a rather strange experience to come on stage and play one and then leave again.
It was okay. Yes, I trust him. I agree to some of his suggestions and don't agree to others. For example, in addition to Rachmaninoff's prelude, he asked me to take part in performing Saint-Saëns's Carnival of Animals. And I said, no, sorry, I don't like this music too much.
I imagine you're always very honest with him.
Oh, yes.
Let's talk a moment about Rachmaninoff.
Not only with him, I'm an honest person by nature.
I don't doubt it. Let's talk about Rachmaninoff, because you're playing quite a lot of Rachmaninoff, and this festival now is celebrating the 150th birthday of Rachmaninoff. And I saw a video that you'd made where you talk about Rachmaninoff as a musician, but also how he represents his country. And you're also playing a lot of Rachmaninoff over the course of this.
Yes, I'm honoring his anniversary this year
And you're
by
honoring...
playing lots of his music.
And clearly it's a composer that you respect and that you love very much.
Yes, indeed. His music became a part of my repertoire since I was 9 years old.
Wow.
Yes, I remember when I was 9, I played his A major waltz from his Morceau de Salon.
That I don't know.
It's an early opus. Not his greatest music, but still very good music.
Are there other pieces of his that... Have you played all the concertos?
No, I have not, and I never shall.
Are there pieces of his that you won't play or that you wish you would play but they're not priorities for you?
I have played a lot his second and third concertos, but not the others, and I have no intention to play the others. I'm not that fond of them.
So Evgeny played a recital here a few days ago, which is available on replay, where there was a lot of music by Rachmaninoff in the second half of the program, and you also played last night one of my absolute favourite pieces, Lilacs, which you played with René Fleming, and it's so touching, and you played it so beautifully.
Thank you. Which also became a part of my repertoire since very long ago, since I was 14.
The piece, Lilacs.
Yes, the Lilacs.
Just before we came on air, you were talking about your old recordings, and you've made a lot of recordings. Do you, in general, are you proud of all your recordings? Do you go back and listen to them? You were talking for a moment about the recording of Rachmaninoff 3, and I wasn't clear if that was at the moment before it was released or whether you came back to it afterwards to listen to.
No. Before it was released, working on the recording.
Are you very involved in the process of working on?
Of course I am.
Yeah.
But as far as listening to my own recordings, I do it very seldom. I much prefer listening to other people's recordings.
Whose people's recordings do you listen to? Do you listen to
all great musicians?
Do you listen to living musicians, or you listen more
living
to
ones as well? And of course, dead ones.
Do you like the recording process?
I prefer live recordings, and that's why many, if not most, of my recordings have been made live. Again, since I was a child.
Because it's more, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but the process is more organic if you play a recital for a public.
Because I feel much more inspired when I have an audience sitting there and listening to me. Much more than when I'm surrounded just by the four walls of a recording studio and the microphones.
I mean, I've known you coming here
I cannot say that I'm proud of all of my recordings. Some of them I'm happy with, some of them I'm not happy with. Some of them I think are good, but I could do better now.
But surely a recording is a kind of snapshot in time. It's that moment. And if you didn't think that it could be better or different now, that would be surprising, I think. So a recording that you made 20 years ago, your opinion on the piece and your interpretation and your ideas have changed since then.
Maybe a year or so ago I listened to my own recording of Chopin's Barcarolle and thought that I could not do it better now.
Wow.
But I also listened to some of my other recordings for example, of Chopin's Second Sonata, of Chopin's 24 Preludes, and thought that some things I could do better now.
That's surprising. I mean, for the Barcarolle, for example. Did you listen to it with the thought of playing it again, or you were just curious?
Yes, exactly. I was listening to all those recordings in order to check what they are like and whether or not I could play better now, and therefore whether or not I should come back to those pieces.
Interesting.
So I realized that the Barcarolle I could not do better, but some of the preludes and some fragments of the Second Sonata I could do better now, and therefore should come back to those pieces at some point in the future.
That surprises me quite a lot, but I think you're very honest, as you've said before. Honesty is a trait. But over all the time that I've known you here, over the last 20 years, I think you go to more concerts of your colleagues than most other people. Do you go to learn, to listen, to hear music, or why are you such a regular follower of your colleagues here?
Simply because I love their playing and respect them, and want to listen to it.
Going back...
Unfortunately, since I have to prepare for my own performances here, I'm not going to as many concerts here as I would love to.
Maybe we could just talk a moment about your recital program here, because as the program is available on Medici, and it starts with the amazing... Well, there's a program all around chromaticism, in a way, the program that you did. Maybe you could talk a little bit about how you constructed it, which perhaps could help our viewers to understand a bit more your thinking behind it.
I construct all my programs in the same way. I simply go, in my head, through the various works I would like to play and think which ones would sound well together and make a good program, that's all.
But the statement...
The only thing I can say, apart from the fact that the second half of my program was devoted entirely to Rachmaninoff's music in order to pay tribute to Rachmaninoff's anniversary, is that I made a change in my original program. Originally, I was going to play not Chopin's F-sharp minor Polonaise at the end of the first half, but Debussy's Estampe. But when I started working on them, I felt, as you can imagine, since the 24th of February last year, my mind and my soul have been totally preoccupied with the war in Ukraine. So when I started working on the Estampe, I felt that that was not the right time to play that kind of music, to enjoy the beauty of the pagodas, the sensuality of the evening in Granada. I felt that I should play something which was relevant to the horrible events in Ukraine, and I decided to come back to Chopin's F-sharp minor Polonaise, which I had not played for many years, but which I had in my repertoire since I was 14 years old. already as a teenager, I knew Chopin's biography. I read Chopin's letters, including his so-called Stuttgart's diary. And although Chopin himself did not write down any verbal program, so to speak, for that Polonaise, it became clear to me at the time, almost immediately, that that piece was about the sufferings of Chopin's country and people enslaved and butchered by the Russian imperialists. So the parallels with the current events were obvious, totally clear, and startling. That's why I decided to replace the Estompes with the Polonaise. And can you believe it? Many people in different countries, on different continents, who listened to me play it, understood what it was about, even though I had not told them about it beforehand. They felt it while listening to my playing. People in London, in Tel Aviv, in Boston, people who didn't know each other.
So at no point did you make a statement to say that you wanted to put that piece in. You just put the piece in and you let people make up their own images or ideas of why you did it.
I explained to my agents why I had decided to replace the Estompe with the Polonaise. My statement was published somewhere, but not everywhere. And not in those cities.
You said once that you preferred not talking about music or using words for music because music was beyond words. And
I would even say above words.
But then that's totally consistent position when you play a piece which is beyond words, but it makes a statement nevertheless.
There are no rules without exceptions, especially at a time like this. We are living in, I would say, an exceptional time since the 24th of February last year.
One of your very illustrious colleagues here, a Georgian violinist, you know who I'm talking about. We were talking about you this morning, and she said to me, he's one of the very few artists from the old Soviet Union who is extremely clear about his position on what's going on in the world at the moment.
What's going on is so horrible that I simply feel that I cannot keep silent. In fact, virtually everything depends on the West. And that's why, although all my life I had hated giving interviews, to tell you honestly, since the 24th of February last year, I started giving as many interviews as I possibly could, appealing to both Western politicians and citizens of Western countries. Appealing to them, explaining what was going on, how horrible it was and is, and that it was a duty of every decent human being to do everything he or she possibly can to help Ukraine and its people.
In your opinion, what does that mean practically? I mean, I know, for example...
send weapons and give money for that. That's what Ukraine needs most. And people, of course. People from different countries are serving in the Ukrainian army as volunteers. Unfortunately, I'm too old and not qualified to do that. Those people who can do it, I believe, should absolutely do it. Obviously, Ukraine is a much smaller country than Russia. That's why its population is much smaller. That's why it has much less weapons. And that's why it is in such a weak position. And that's why Russia invaded it.
But they would never have believed it would have taken this long
True.
not to have succeeded.
True, but unfortunately, the Western politicians also didn't believe it in the beginning.
Yeah.
And that's why on the first day of the Russian full-scale invasion, President Biden offered asylum to President Zelensky, to which the latter replied that he needed not transportation but weapons.
You're extremely aware politically. I wanted to talk in general about your curiosity. I mean, you're extremely curious in all
I'm not
all areas.
at all curious about all sorts of political intrigues and scandals.
Mm-hmm.
I am concerned about real problems, which for me are not simply political, but also humanitarian. One does not have to be interested in politics. Nobody is obliged to be interested in anything. I, for instance, have never been interested in mathematics. But I believe that every single decent human being is obliged not to be indifferent to the sufferings of other human beings and to help victims of injustice, violence, etc.
And you stood up. There was a moment you stood up against this country that we're in now, in Switzerland. And they then changed their mind about a soldier that needed to be treated here.
Not a soldier, but soldiers in general.
And then they...
Yes.
Maybe this is a stupid question. Forgive me if it is. I'm full
Okay.
of... I can be ignorant. Can you separate Rachmaninoff, the composer, from Rachmaninoff, the country he represents? Because you talked in the film that you made, you said, I'm celebrating Rachmaninoff as a composer, but I'm not condoning the country that he hails from.
Well, first of all, it would be more precise to use the word state, not country. And obviously Rachmaninoff had nothing to do with the Russian state as it is now. Rachmaninoff died in the United States, by the way, years before Putin was born.
But there are some artists that are not playing Russian music as a kind of statement. Now, each artist has a different view of their...
I know that some, maybe even many Ukrainians, I know some of such people personally who simply cannot listen to Russian music, nor read Russian literature now. And of course, I understand them very well.
Yeah.
By the way, I say that when, after the beginning of the war, I started working on Rachmaninoff's music, I myself had a kind of dubious feeling, which I did not have when I was working, for example, on Shostakovich's music. Because in Rachmaninoff's music, the Russian national element is very present. And in the beginning, it did make me feel somewhat uneasy.
And you hadn't expected it? You hadn't expected to have this reaction?
I don't remember, honestly, what I had been expecting before that. But I do remember that somehow I managed to get over it.
Do you change the way that you think about this music since February last year? Do you have a feeling that it should be presented, if possible, in a less nationalistic way? Less, I don't know.
No. It's not nationalistic. Rachmaninoff was not a nationalist. True, he had some wrong views about Ukraine and the other countries which were part of the Russian Empire in which he lived. But he was not a nationalist. He was a person of generally progressive views for his time. No, I believe that music should always be played the way it was written, the way the composer meant it to be played.
As I said, you're extremely curious, and you read a lot, and you compose and you write, and poetry is a big part of your interest. Interest is the wrong word. You're passionate about poetry in general.
Yes.
And I was curious. I mean, there's a lot of talk about poetry in Russian and Yiddish. Do you read poetry in English also?
Of course.
And English
What
poets?
I do since my young years. I remember when I came to England for the very first time. That was a school trip.
Wow.
Yes, in 1987.
Wow, and you were 16.
Even 15.
Okay.
Before I turned 16. When things already started changing in the former Soviet Union, we were invited by some left-wing activists in England. So one of the people, he was a very nice young man named Robin, I don't remember his family name, gave me as a present a book of William Blake's poetry.
Wow.
Which I immediately started reading.
Tiger. Did you speak English? I mean, you could understand English?
My English, some.
Right.
A little bit. But of course I had dictionaries at home. And then there was a great Russian poet, Vasily Zhukovsky, a contemporary of Pushkin, who translated lots of poetry from other languages. And either someone gave me for present or my parents bought, that was at the end of 1980s, 2 volumes of Zhukovsky's translations of great poetry from different languages, starting from fragments of Homer's Odyssey. They included some German poetry, lots of different things, and some English poetry as well, including, among other things, The Prisoner of Chillon, which I immediately started not only reading but learning by heart. That were the original texts on the left pages, and Zhukovsky's translations in Russian on the right pages. So I was able to read the original English texts as well.
How amazing.
So yes, I have always loved reading poetry.
Do you still remember it?
I remember the beginning. My hair is grey, but not with years, nor grew it white in a single night, as men's had grown from sudden fears. My limbs are bowed, though not with toil, but trusted with a vile repose, for they have been a dungeon's spoil. And mine have been the fate of those to whom the goodly earth and air are banned and barred, forbidden fair. But that was for my father's faith. I suffered chains and courted death. And when I read that, of course, I immediately thought of my Jewish people who had also been suffering a lot for their father's faith.
Or more their mother's faith, but perhaps, yes.
Oh.
That's also been...
And then, many years later, I found a Yiddish translation of The Prisoner of Chillon.
No.
But I have not learned it by heart.
Okay, so we'll come back next year and we'll do chapter 2,
as well as many other masterpieces of the English poetry. Some of Shakespeare's plays, Shakespeare's songs. By the way, I myself translated Hamlet's monologue into Yiddish during one of my sleepless nights.
How many sleepless nights do you have?
Unfortunately, many more than I would like to have.
I'm sorry. Do you do that for fun, or you do? I mean, because you said also that you want this language to exist and to continue and to develop and flourish, and that's your.
Even the Yiddish language.
Yes, and you.
I simply love it. It is one of my childhood memories.
Would you give me some Hamlet in Yiddish?
I'll try. The thing is that I
You can
almost
say no.
never remember my own writings. Just as I very seldom listen to my own recordings, I prefer learning other people's poetry by heart. But I can try to remember at least the beginning. Zu sein, sind nicht zu sein. Das ist die Kasche. Sie edler ist in einem Geist zu leiden, dem Besen Geurels, Steinwarfers und Pfeilen, sie sich bewaffnen und entscheiden machen, a Sof zum Jampf und Zores. Deut a Schlaf nicht mehr. Und mit a Schlaf a Sof mir machen zum Harzweitig und tausender Naturklepp, was jarschend unser Guf, sie sei der Greich und Gebämes zu begehren. Starben, schlafen und efter Holmen. Then I don't remember.
Bravo. I'm going to just ask you once more. You're curious because that's how you are. But I suspect that there are quite a lot of young musicians and older musicians that aren't nearly as curious about the art around them, except focusing on the piano piece or the violin piece.
Somehow, since childhood, I have been brought up. I've been told by, I don't even remember whom, but somehow I have been told since childhood that to be a good musician, one should know other arts as well.
I think it's one of the saddest things that happens is that musicians don't really know. You know, if you play Bach, that you never listen to a cantata, or you know the.
That you mean?
That's even the minorest amount of curiosity. That if you play the chromatic fantasy.
I remember Horowitz said, in order to play even one small piece of a great composer, you have to know all his other works, including his symphonic and chamber music, etc.
But I think it would shock you how few do, or that there are some that don't. I have one more question.
But do they play well? I mean, from the intellectual point of view. We know that For example, Van Cliburn did not. And we know what happened to him.
But
How
perhaps,
his talent,
perhaps those
his
are the exceptions.
immense gift deteriorated. But I guess one was the consequence of the other. I know that from Kirill Kondrashin's book of memoirs. Kondrashin was a famous Soviet conductor who
I know exactly.
defected to the Netherlands a few years before his death. He was one of the most prominent conductors in the former Soviet Union. He conducted the final round of the first Tchaikovsky competition, which Van Cliburn won. So he and Cliburn got to know each other and became good friends and worked together a lot afterwards in the Soviet Union as well as in the United States. And Kondrashin said in his book of memoirs that Cliburn was a very nice man, but not developed enough, that he had a poor knowledge of symphonic music and opera, that even his knowledge of the piano literature was limited, and that he did not want to improve himself, to change anything.
Let me
That's
ask you.
Kondrashin's evidence.
Let me ask you one more question. You said 10 minutes ago that you felt more at ease with Shostakovich's music now than you did with other Russian composers.
With Rachmaninoff.
Than, for example, on Rachmaninoff. Do you think Shostakovich music has a relevance in today's times?
Absolutely. And also it virtually has no Russian national element.
Right, that was my point. This is what Herbert Blomstedt calls fake news, in a way, that he used moments in his pieces to protest. And there's hidden meaning. Is that what you're talking about?
No.
In Shostakovich?
You mean when we talk about the relevance of his music now?
Exactly.
Yes. But also simply the fact that lots of his music is very tragic. Well, the piece of music I meant was his second trio, which I played with other wonderful musicians at two of the gala concerts for Ukraine, in which I took part soon after the war began. I felt that that piece was very relevant simply because it was very tragic. I do not think that there was any message of protest in that piece of music, even though what one could make such an assumption because it was written during World War II and the Holocaust, and there are Jewish themes in that music, but there is no evidence of that. The piece, as we know, was dedicated to the memory of one of Shostakovich's best friends, Ivan Soletinsky, who was an extraordinary man, a man of encyclopedic knowledge, a man who influenced Shostakovich a lot, Shostakovich's tastes in particular. So what I meant was simply because Shostakovich's music is full of drama and tragedy, and that's what's happening in Ukraine now. That's why it's relevant. On the other hand, it virtually has no Russian national element in it, and that's why I didn't have that strange feeling, and still don't when I play it. Of course, the same thing applies to Prokofiev's and Scriabin's music.
Arguably, Prokofiev was Ukrainian. Arguably.
He was born in
What is now Ukraine,
but I don't think he was of the Ukrainian origin.
Listen, you're somebody who says what you think and believes in what you think, and I think the stand that you're making and the statements you're making are incredibly inspirational for everybody.